Hello, my name is Caleb Prenovo,
And I'm Dustin Breland.
and this is the Master's Apprentice, learning to be like Jesus. And if you haven't seen it yet, we actually made a video, an episode explaining a little bit about who we are and what our desires are for this channel and for this podcast. So if you just stumbled onto this video and have no idea what this is about, I would suggest clicking back and watching that one. Maybe I'll even put a link somewhere for you to check that out. I am, I'll just say this. We are in completely different parts of the country. Is that right, Dustin?
Yes, we are. Over here in Oregon, we are just about to get into all rain, no sun. So definitely getting prepared for that. We do have a few nice sunny days left, so soaking that up as much as possible. But definitely a lot more rain headed our way.
Well, over here in Illinois, possible snow this weekend is what I hear.
Seriously?
Yeah, and I'm not sure when this episode will release here, but it's like the end of October right now, and yeah, we're about to have fun.
That's crazy already.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty early. It's really cold. It's nasty cold today. But with that, there is a chance for some snow. But they usually get the weather wrong, and so they'd rather predict snow and there not be than the other way around.
Sure. Is it like a rush on like bread and milk
Is it like what?
at the store? Is it like a rush on bread and milk?
Maybe for some people, that doesn't happen till January.
Oh, okay.
Because that's when it gets real.
Yeah.
That's when it gets real. Oh man. Well, we want to kind of dive into this episode, and there's a lot of things that I know you and I want to talk about, and so
Yeah.
this episode is kind of setting up the things that we're wanting to talk about, and something that I think is kind of beneficial for our future conversations. And it all kind of revolves around the idea of what it means to have like a rule of life. And I'll explain kind of what that is, and we both will kind of bounce off each other on this a bit, because that might be a new term for some people, and there could be other terms that you use for that. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here. If I can, I'd like to share a scripture verse here first to kick us off, and hopefully that works. Cool. All right. 2 Peter chapter 3, it says, "Take care that you're not carried away with the error of lawless people and lose your own stability." In other words, be aware and be on guard against the strong influences of people who have no self-control, who live as they please, and would lead you to live as they live, resulting in you losing the stability that you should have in Jesus. Instead of being led into instability, it goes on to say, grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Dustin, I want to throw it to you just for a moment. What's something about this text that kind of sticks out to you, or in relation to what we're kind of talking about today?
Yeah, so I think for me, something that's been helpful anytime you see a command or an imperative statement in the Bible, it's there because we as humans naturally don't do that. So that's been helpful for me over the years in studying. It's like, this command is here, not because it's necessarily a reminder, it's because we don't do this. And so I look at my own life, and a lot of the things that I do, like I get 2 or 3 weeks down the road, I look back and I was like, oh wow, I just lost 2 or 3 weeks. I was like on autopilot, right? And just doing the daily things, the grind, and I turn around and I've already lost a month. And I think what this is kind of pointing out is, if we're not careful of what's influencing us, we can become unstable, and that can happen under the surface and you not even realize it. So I know for me, as I go through my life daily, I've got to be aware of what's influencing me, what is coming through my brain, my heart, and impacting my daily decisions. And if I'm not careful what those things are, I get 3 or 4 weeks down the road and I'm like, man, I'm in a worse place than I was a month ago. Like I just start taking inventory. It's like how did this happen? It can happen without even knowing. Do you feel like that
Absolutely.
sometimes?
Oh yeah, like it'll sneak up on you because all of a sudden it's like, oh man, what has been my routine for the past couple of weeks?
Yes. Yes.
And then, but what happens is the reason that you notice, I think I just said wheezing. The reason, the reason that you notice is stuff starts breaking down, like
Yes.
either mentally, spiritually, with your family,
Yes.
like stuff kind of like, man, why do I feel this way? Why am I kind of going through that? Because like, oh man, wait,
Yeah.
what has been my rule of life? What has been my
Yes.
routine for the
Right.
last few weeks? Because the reality is every day is made up of multiple little decisions, and many of those decisions form us over a period of time.
Yeah.
And so we're doing things that are forming us. If you have a family, you're doing things that are forming your family, and we're not even aware of it sometimes. So when talking about a rule of life, it could even just be your regular habits. Some may be good, some may be bad, right? Some worse than we realize that we just don't
Sure.
even think about. But I'll say this, and I'll throw this back at you too. I'm afraid that because of the way that we grew up, or because of the certain ideas maybe in our culture, or maybe because of what's just accepted, that we've unknowingly been led by people who live as they please and resulting in our instability. And so it's like, well, this is just what people do. This is how you live life. This is how you go through a day. This is how you go through a week. This is how you calm down at the end of the day. This is how you begin a day. This is whether flippantly or intentionally, we're influenced and by these things and how we live. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for me, it's uh, you talk to people, you have um, I should back up. One thing that I think of is the first thing, and I've got to fight this. The first thing that I do when I wake up, I turn over, I look at my phone, and then I get lost on my phone. And then
Mm-hmm.
20 or 30 minutes later, get up, get ready, come home after work, go to bed. What's the last thing I do? Phone,
Yep.
right? Right. So like that's just an example, but that's something that everyone does. It's something normal, right? It's
Right.
something that
Absolutely.
most people do. And how you said, like how people live their life. It's if you're not careful, the voices, what people accept as normal, what people think should be the case, that just starts to creep in, and you're like, oh, it's okay. That's what everybody else does. And you may not even say that out loud, but like you accept that as something that, oh, it's okay. Maybe I should be a little less strict on myself, or I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. No, it does. Because and with the phone thing, that's such a hard one, right? And I think it's
Yeah,
because we use it for almost everything.
we do. Yeah.
We take notes on our phone. We communicate with people through our phone. We use the Maps app on our phone. We use entertainment for our phone. Some people might also use their phones for art or for making music or different. And so all of a sudden, it's like encompassing all the things that you normally would have to have multiple devices or go to multiple places to use. And so it easily, especially with notifications the way that they are, it easily gets you sucked in. And what happens is, for better or for worse, our phones can be one of the primary formations of our life, through the news, through social media, through what's trending.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah.
To piggyback on that, I think yes, all of that is true, but also under the surface, it's conditioning you in multiple ways. One is I've got to have everything at my fingertips now. So it's you are impatient. um, you have to know everything. Like I think of back when I was a kid, if I didn't know something, I couldn't just go to a phone and look it up and know the answer. I had to be okay with not knowing the answer. You know what I mean? Like,
Dude, my kids do this now. Every time they ask me a question, I go, I'm not sure. They go, Google it. They say ask Siri. There you go.
Ask Siri. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about this very thing of how we are not comfortable with not knowing. And there was a man and his wife. They were going on a trip, trying to get away from phones and just be alone together. And they were encountering different things in this culture they had gone overseas. So they were encountering things that they weren't sure of, or like they saw something and it's like, oh, I wonder when this was built. And his spouse was like, man, if we only had a phone, we could like look this up and figure this out. And he looked at her and he was like, let's be okay with not knowing. How fun would that be not to know? And it's such a like novel thing now because we're so used to like, oh, I don't know, let me go to a phone, right? So it's conditioning us to want to know everything, be constantly connected to what's going on around us. So there's different things that even under the surface our phone is conditioning us for that may not necessarily be helpful, but it ends up being part of our daily routine and our daily habits.
And the phone's an easy one to like poke at because we can all relate to that. But there is more than just that. There's other things that we're doing or not doing that are forming us. It's just the phone's probably a very predominant one that kind of crosses over into a lot of categories. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Let's be sure to define what a rule of life is a little bit, because I think the idea is kind of being captured. But I have a definition that I've written, and feel free to give any clarifiers or if you have your own definition. Before I give that, I want to say that when we're the context, when we're talking about a rule of life, we're talking about as a means to an end, right? It's not the end itself. Our goal is to be an apprentice of Jesus, to draw close to God, to grow in his grace. The goal isn't to have a rule of life. Because if we're going to talk about a rule of life, and then in the future you're talking about spiritual disciplines and so on and so forth, if the goal isn't to grow in grace and to be like our master, then all we have is stuff. All we have is, oh, I have this rule, I have this information. Well, that's great. As I like to say, it's if the tool analogy that I like to use is. It's like I have a hammer. Okay. But you take that hammer and you use it to put the nail into the wood.
Right.
And now it's helping you accomplish the intention of why you got the hammer. It does us no good if we just start collecting hammers and put them in our toolbox. Then you just have a hammer collection, but it's not actually accomplishing anything if you never use it to accomplish what it was meant to accomplish. So I wanted to give that clarification before I say here's a rule of life, and a clarification for a lot of our conversation about these things is I like to think of them as tools that as a means to draw near to Christ and to grow in his grace, not as the end. In other words, it's like, haha, I prayed today.
Right.
It would be maybe make an actual spiritual example. I prayed today. Ha, check. Well, through prayer, did you draw closer to Jesus and become more like his image and grow in his grace? Or did you pray today? Those are two different things.
Right.
Should I go ahead and give the definition, or did you want to add anything to that before I did?
Well, I don't know who'd be listening to this, but I know just based on both of our backgrounds that this concept of the checking the box rule of life kind of concept, it's been around for a long time. It's just taken different forms over the years, especially for me. Because I mean, growing up, it was the same thing, except it was just worded differently. It was, you have your quiet time or devotion time. You go to church 3 times a week. You, way back in the day, we had, door knocking for soul winning. Like you had all of these things. And if you accomplished those things, then you were seen as a good Christian. And looking back, I was like, what was I accomplishing? It felt like that was the end, not the means to the end, as you're bringing up.
That ties into a previous conversation that we've had on my podcast, on the Biblicist podcast, when we talked about our heart matters. So, and talked about how Israel was still doing the animal sacrifices, but their heart was far from God. So it's like you're just doing these things, but there's nothing genuine or sincere, or there's no growth.
Right.
Here, so I'm going to give you my definition, Dustin. I'm just going to read my definition I have written down, and then I'm going to give that to you to see if maybe you'd say it differently or want to add any clarification or tell me why it's wrong. A rule of life is an intentional plan to ensure that loving God and loving your neighbor is at the center of everything we do.
It's a good definition.
It is. I have to give credit to how I came up with that wording. I learned from Justin Earley, who wrote The Common Rule, which is a great book on having a rule of life. I highly recommend A Rule of Life. I had it here somewhere, and I haven't read yet, but he also has The Habits of the Household, which is also about having a rule of life, or a common rule, which is another name for that. But it's more focused on family as opposed to an individual. But anyway, so I do have to give credit to where credit is due. That definition is definitely inspired by Justin Earley.
I do think that, I don't know who's watching this. I would like to maybe point out, we're pastors, so we're on a podcast talking about, learning to be like Jesus. So we're definitely going to have that spiritual lens that we're looking through. But I do think it's important to clarify that everyone does have a rule of life. It's not necessarily even a spiritual thing. It's how you live your everyday life. Like, you wake up Monday through Friday, you go to your job, that 9 to 5 job. You sleep in on Saturday, you watch football on Sunday. Like, you have a rule of life, and that is determining what life looks like. When you get to the end of your life, like, your way of living will determine the outcome.
Yeah, that's really good, Dustin. I was going to put it this way. There's some things that we do as part of our rule, as part of our routine, as we're being formed into something and to someone.
Yeah.
One way or another, even if it's into our own image of whatever we are projecting ourselves to be, and we're forming into something. And it's not about, sometimes we can be too explicit in saying bad rule of life versus good rule of life. I think it's more helpful to say, hey, it's not that your current routine's bad. The question is, could it be better?
Right.
So I think that's an important nuance, because I don't want, it's not that it's bad to look at your phone when you get up in the morning.
Right.
But could your day be better if maybe you did something else besides look at your phone when you got up in the morning? What if you changed that daily rule of, you know what? As part of my daily rule of life, I'm not going to pick up my phone first, or I'm not going to end on my phone today, or both of those things.
Right.
Or I'm not going to, it's not that it's wrong to binge watch your favorite television show,
Right.
but maybe you should limit how much shows you watch, and maybe you should pick up a book instead. Or maybe if you're married, talk to your spouse more than you have been.
Right.
If you have kids, maybe, I normally do this on this night of the week or this, but maybe I should invest in my kids. Not because the stuff you were doing was necessarily inherently wrong or bad, but it's like,
Right.
but could we have a better rule of life to where you become, from in this Christian sense of drawing close to God to reflect who he is, and then also, but to love the people around us.
Right.
And that's whether you even have a family or not, just your own neighbors, the people around you, because your formation will influence the people around you as well.
Yeah, I think to kind of summarize what you're saying, there's a quote that I really love, and I'm gonna use my phone to read it because I want to get it word for word here.
Can't use your phones. We just said phones are bad, Dustin. Phones are bad. Can't use, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We did not say that. We did not say that. Oh my God.
So, what you're describing is summarized this way, I think. When you look at your rule of life, it is producing a result. So if you're not happy with the result, then something has to change. You can't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, right? So the quote is, your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. Your current habits are perfectly designed to deliver your current results. So if you are 3 weeks down the road on autopilot and you look back and you're like, oh, wow, I was very harsh to my kid there. What's going on? Or I've not read anything in scripture for like a month. What's going on? Like when those things trigger, that is pause to say, okay, this is the result. So these habits are delivering this result. If I'm not happy with the outcome, I have to change my rule of life. I have to change my habits. And so if you're in that place where you're just like, I'm not happy with the results, I'm not happy with where I'm at, I'm not happy that I'm not drawing closer to God, maybe I should not binge my favorite TV show and spend 10 hours, because while not inherently wrong, it's not delivering the outcome, the result that I would like, right?
Yeah, part of that is what you're implying too, is the necessity of like self-assessment.
Yes.
Of where are you at in life, and is this where you want to be?
Right.
And so part of this journey that we're going on is a journey personally for us, but also encouraging others of, are you happy with how things are? With who you are as a person and what your family is and how you interact with the people around you, and like are you happy with your thoughts and where your head is at and where your heart is at? And because everything that we do affects that and is forming us one direction or another. And I think this is just a helpful thing in regards to this conversation and future conversations of, that's really the heart of this, is like, we're nobody special. We're not like experts on this. There's people that I would consider that are pretty good experts on this topic. But I think a lot of us are just kind of going through life and just trying to make it sometimes.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like, I totally get that. But no matter what stage of life that you're in, I'll say this, Dustin, we probably need to start wrapping this up here, but I was talking with someone about this the other day, and it was cool because this is what we're talking about. And actually in person, it kind of came up with someone naturally. And it was like, here's what's cool about a rule of life. And rule of lives can change. There can be nuances to them, but there's some things that stay the same in one form or another. As you develop a rule of life, there's certain elements that you'll keep for a longer term. And I said, here's the cool thing about a rule of life. Once again, we all have one, but when you make one intentional, is what happens is, no matter what happens in life, no matter if you have money or don't have money, whether things in the world are going well or terrible, or in your own life, great or terrible, you can have a system in place, a rule of life, to where that's the same.
Yeah.
And there can be positive, supernatural, spiritual formation happening in our lives when everything else could just be falling apart. It's like, there's no money in my bank account. The world looks like a mess over there. Everyone's shooting at each other. And it's just like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And, I'm using like really dramatic examples. Maybe I shouldn't be so dramatic, but it's just like, no matter all, you're just exhausted because you're having to work 50, 60, 70 hours plus, or you're working 2 jobs, whatever that is. But then there can be a consistency that even though there's this other stuff going on, there's these positive formations happening in our life. And then you can choose to protect those things knowing that there's a positive return. Anyone who's in like the fitness world knows this. They know that like going to the gym, they have this positive feedback with their body and with their mind. And so everything else could be like going terrible, but I had a great week because I made it to the gym 3 times. Yeah. Right? Like, and that can be part of a rule of life too, like fitness. But like, we know this is what I mean. Like, we're going to emphasize this, especially some spiritual aspects of this for sure. But like, the physical aspect even or runners, they go out and run and that's something that's forming them physically and spiritually. And everything else could be terrible, but you had great runs that week.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think too, just to reiterate, if we have not already driven the point home, everything you're describing though, it's on purpose. Like, you just don't happen to fall into that. Using your gym example, you don't happen to just go to the gym. It just doesn't happen. You have to be on purpose, making the decision ahead of the time. Okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z this week. It's going to happen on these days. And no matter what, no matter how crazy life gets, no matter how off schedule I become on these other things, this is happening here at this time. You have to make that decision and follow through.
Yeah. Yep. And the last thing I'll add, so like this, right, you have to have a plan. I know for me, if I'm going to go to the gym, like, it has to be a completely pre-planned event. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. But that's the same with anything. And what I'll add to that is one last kind of nuance I wanted to add is that a rule of life can be encompassing different things. It could be daily rules. And once again, rule might not be the greatest word for that, but you get the idea. We're going to your daily routine.
Yeah.
There could be weekly routines. In other words, it's not every day, but there's certain things that always happen in a week as opposed to everything that might happen in a day. And there could even be monthly. There could even be yearly. It's like every year I'm doing these 3 things. Every month I'm doing this thing or that thing. And I can, we're have our part 2 or our after show talk, whatever we're going to call that. We can talk kind of personally more about our rule of lives and what we're striving for a little bit. But any other thoughts before we close out this episode?
No, I don't think so. And I think we'll probably get into it more in our part 2 after show, like you said, whatever we're going to decide to call that.
Whatever we're going to call that.
Haven't figured it out yet. I think we'll probably get more into it in that part, but I do just want, maybe as a tease, we're all in different stages of life, and I don't want to overlook the fact that there are some people who are legitimately drowning right now. And, we're definitely going to talk spiritually about what it looks like to have a rule of life, but there are some people who just work in 3 jobs. I know it's tough everywhere, but I can speak to just what I see here locally is with inflation and cost of living going up. It's just crazy expensive out there. You go to the grocery store and you see all the prices are much higher than they were a year ago. People are having to just work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive and just to make it. And we're talking about being intentional and setting a rule of life, and they're like, what life? I just work, or I'm in over my head. And so I just want to reiterate that we see you, and God sees you, more importantly. And whatever season of life you find yourself in, we're not saying make these drastic changes. We're just saying, with the time that you do have available, even if it's seconds, minutes that you only have, what can you do in those seconds or minutes? You know, we're not asking for these massive changes. We're just saying, hey, with the time you actually have, even if it's just a minute, is there something you could do with that minute? Does that make sense? I don't want to overlook
no,
that.
that is perfect, Dustin. I really appreciate you articulating it that way. Is what I'd say it like this, and I don't want to reiterate the whole thing. I'll just say this: is with what you do have, if especially with work and finances and all of that, and the heaviness of all of that, the pressures of that. What I would say, it's even that if you have limited time, just and limited bandwidth, I'd even encourage you, it's that much more important that you capture those moments, and not that what you're doing right now is bad. You're working so hard to make it work. The question is simply, in the midst of how hard it is, what can I do to make it a little better?
Yeah.
And also say in there, hang in there, and keep up the good work, because it is hard, it is difficult, and but you are seen, and you have friends who care. So, hey, well, we got to wrap this up. I think we went a little bit long for our first episode, but that's okay. So we're going to transition to our after show, after party, part 2. Basically, we're going to talk a little more personal about our lives and what a rule of life looks like in our lives, or what it doesn't look like, or what we hope for it to look like. But it's going to be very authentic, transparent place to hang out and talk about that. So leave in the comments below what you thought about this episode, or if you have any questions about a rule of life. If you liked it, please subscribe, like, and share, or whatever platform that you are watching this on. And we look forward to seeing you over at the whatchamacallit. See you over there.
Yes. See you there.